So
Oh,
we were
so
going to talk about the aware
the
ego.
aware ego, and the aware ego is just an amazing process. I want to call it thing because everybody calls it a thing and one thinks of it as a thing, but it's a process. And that's what's so marvelous about it. It keeps changing and it's a slippery little thing. We lose it. But I've watched people now over 40 years as their aware ego emerges and blossoms and changes and is richer and fuller and really embraces all the selves. And these people are always much nicer than your average Joe because whatever's out there is them. Mm. And so the more we integrate, the more accepting we are of people as they are, and we're easier to deal with. Because as our aware ego evolves, there's less of the outer world that we need to project upon.
Yeah, and it's not a state, is it? It's not one state because it can always
grab it.
disidentify.
And so it's disidentifying from selves, one after another, and the little buggers come back because they never leave. I can say at 86, I still have selves I wish would not bother me or take over. But the older you get or the more you work with it, it's an imperceptible process. So it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to transmit because it's not something that we're necessarily aware of. Because as soon as we think we've got it, we've lost it. And that's a truism. It just is. As soon as we think, wow, I'm in an aware ego, we can think, well, my pusher hasn't taken over, my critic hasn't taken over, my good mother or your responsible father hasn't taken over.
Yeah, I think that this concept still needs a lot of work because people are so keen on finding the true self or some self that takes care of the vulnerable child or this or that. And that can easily become another primary self in the voice-dialogue term. So the aware ego is something else than one of these positions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It is absolutely not one of the selves. And anybody that I've seen trying to invent an aware ego, it turns it into something static. Okay, you get there, it's a state. And you meditate until you get there. Well, you meditate until you get into a spiritual self. Meditate until you get into a self that is all it's a wonderful word. Loving kindness is all loving kindness and forgiving and accepting of everybody else who's a little bit less enlightened than I am. And I feel really good and solid, and I'm taking care of my inner child, but I'm not. It's just another self. So I moved in a really nice spiritual mother.
Yeah.
Who's
So in a way, it's very hard to recognize it oneself.
Absolutely, but you can see somebody else.
Yeah, so you need, in a way, I think this dialogue process is so rich to have another person with the awareness help you just to recognize or disidentify or yeah.
You're so right, and you're helping me, with us talking this way, because these are really important points. And I know we went through a period of trying to call it the aware ego process, which is really nice, but it's not very inviting. I don't know, it really is an aware ego process, depending whether I'm in my British phase or my American phase.
American. Yeah.
But it is, it's so many selves masquerade as the aware ego. There's an observing mind that comes in and is delighted to be the aware ego and to know exactly, what's going on. We know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know.
How can you say a little bit, how did you and Hal help each other to disidentify, or I know you had a lot of
bonding patterns did a lot for us. because because when we were upset with each other, or when we were not in a good place or in a negative bonding pattern, we wanted to get out of it. And so we would look at the different selves that were operating, and we each of us sort of knew when the other one was stuck. So if we get the slipping out from an aware ego, or some self is taking over, we would alert the other person to it if we could.
Yeah.
Lots of times we can't. We would just get into a negative bonding pattern.
Yeah.
And then in getting out of it, we would be separating from the selves that have got us into it.
Yeah. Well, it might be interesting to, how can people give feedback to one another, maybe not when they're in a bonding pattern, but like a colleague or a co-worker or a friend.
That's really good. And that's a really important question, because basically it's not what you say, it's who says it.
Sorry, can you say that again?
It's not what you say, it's who says it.
Who says it?
I'm really thinking of using that as a title for a book at this point.
Yeah.
Because if it's a good test of how much of an aware ego you're in, or how much you're separated from the selves, how unattached you are. Because an aware ego, the good thing is, it's not really that attached to the other person seeing the light of day.
Okay, yeah.
So as soon as you feel that, if the other person would just know that every time she does that, she makes me angry and everybody turns her off. If she just saw that, she would be so good. And you're in I'm in a self, you're in a self.
Yeah.
But if you're, it's sort of a shame. She does this. I'd love to bring it to her attention.
More mild.
So it would be, you would be staying energetic, Mr. Energy Master, you're staying energetically connected to her.
Yeah. So I think maybe in the energy in the body, there would be certain signs that you'll get out of the aware ego, and maybe other signs that you're more into it, or
exactly. You could sort of feel it happening if you're trying to give some feedback, say to a colleague, or even to a client that you're talking to, or you can sort of feel in yourself, you can feel the energy of efforting. You could feel your energy switching. You could feel losing connection to the other person. You can you can feel maybe the part of you that says to saying in your ear, I could just shake her until she gets it,
Yeah.
And it's a sort of a hint that you're not where ego process is not operating. If it is, it's, well, this is what I'd like her to be able to see, or him to be able to see. And if he doesn't, there's nothing I can do about it. But at least I want to really, present it with my heart in it as well as my mind.
Yeah, heart and mind. Yeah. Well, these are, thank you. These are some interesting angles, again, to look at it, to look at the aware ego process.
Yes.
Which is at the heart of the voice dialogue process.
Really, it really is. And you could see, it's wonderful. When you can see as these evolve over the years in people, as this process evolves over the years, you can really see they're basically more contented with themselves. Whether they get nervous before making a presentation and they need a little bit of oomph to push them out, or and they don't want to be nervous, and so instead they go into their heads and lose their hearts. It's it becomes less of a problem. And they know how to play their energies, and they know how to be more impersonal. They know more how to separate themselves from the other person while being connected.
Yeah, it seems also there's like more of a softness around it. It's a deep, but it's also connected and like kind of softness.
That's the secret, and that's why they're much nicer to be with usually. Either than they were in the old days, or just they're easier with themselves and they're softer with themselves. And in being softer with yourself, you're softer with the other people. And the other thing is, when you facilitate voice dialogue, if you're a good facilitator, you're aware, you're facilitating, you become an aware ego process. You're facilitating from that space, really doing a good facilitation puts you in that.
That's almost again a topic in itself. I think the facilitation helps to develop the aware ego.
Absolutely.
For the facilitator.
For the facilitator as well as for the subject.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because you're practicing that over and over again. If you have a script that you're reading, you're not facilitating voice dialogue. You're
exactly. Yeah.
You're teaching an acting method, sort of.
That's protocols. Yeah.
And if you're just gobsmacked surprised at what comes out of a facilitation, you can be guaranteed that you weren't in a self when you, as a facilitator. You were working from an aware ego, or you wouldn't have gotten that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have had the flexibility to move from, you thought you were going to be talking to a weepy, vulnerable child, and instead you got this killer 3-year-old.
Yeah. So I think the polarity to deal with is the one between knowing and not knowing.
Yes.
To know what, like having this, and then being surprised and say, let's see what.
Yeah. Absolutely. And as soon as you think you really should know, you really know, you're putting the other person into your fantasy.
Yeah.
And it is that polarity of knowing and not knowing, or of conscious and not conscious. And I know Hal always used to say, well, as Jung used to say, the unconscious is unconscious.
Yeah.
And he loved saying that. And I would like to quote Hal, quoting Jung, that, yeah, it just is. And to sit back and to think, yeah, what I'm not conscious of now, maybe I'll get conscious of later, maybe in future life, or somebody who I love is going to point out something to me that I'll listen.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah.
Or better than that, somebody who loves me is going to point out to me.
Good.
I said better than somebody I love. Somebody who loves me is going to point out to me so I can hear it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Sidra.
This was a pleasure.
Nice talking to you.
It's nice talking to you. It's my first podcast.
The podcast. Yeah, let's see what happens with this.